Good evening. We are now in the evening public input session of the March 16th, 2021 Lane County Board of Commissioners meeting. At this point in time, Diana tells us that there is not anyone signed up for public comment, which I don't know about the rest of the board, but I'm so sad. I really hope we can get word out and get a lot more input for these evening sessions before the time being. Until someone signs up, we did have an item that we wanted to bring up this evening. Mr. Dingle, would you take care of that?
Yes, Chair Bernie, Board of Commissioners, you'll recall we had an executive session this afternoon on the board's authority to extend and apply retroactively an extension of the time period to gather signatures for two measures, local measures currently circulating. I believe that I think we have the adequate input, and I think what the chair is asking me to do is restate what I understand it would be in the form of a motion or three head nods for staff to proceed with drafting an ordinance. The ordinance would extend the period of time to gather signatures for the two measures that are currently circulating, star voting and the Second Amendment sanctuary. Each would be extended 6 months from their individual current deadline for the gathering of signatures. The ordinance would be tied specifically to these two measures. And finally, the measure or the ordinance would contain a sunset clause that would have it automatically end at the conclusion of the relevant time periods for the signature gathering of these two ordinances. Basically making it very clear that this applies to these two measures and these two measures only.
Thank you. We need to make this decision in public meeting. So is there any further discussion before, well, actually, will someone make that motion?
So moved, Chair.
No, I need to hear it in exactly the words that Mr. Dingle gave it to us. I'm just kidding. Thank you very much, Commissioner Farr. And Commissioner Bozovich, did I see you second that?
Yes, you did.
Thank you. Is there any discussion to this before we vote on it? Commissioner Trieger.
Thank you, Chair. I'm also disappointed in the public comment, and so I would like us to talk about that another time. But into this motion, I did a bit of thinking and research this afternoon on this topic. And one, given the precedent of the Supreme Court's case in the request around the redistricting extension, and two, in thinking about our intent behind this, COVID has disrupted a lot of things for a lot of people and a lot of processes with a lot of disparate impact and disparate outcome. And I'm afraid that if we extend signature gathering, we're trying to take a thing that has affected everyone, and in this case, signature gatherers in the same way, but it's had different impact on them because of when their individual clocks started ticking. But we don't level any playing field by doing this. And in fact, we could just be layering on another unequal or disparate impact. COVID, none of us has any control over, but trying to sort of account for or manipulate a process in this way we do. And I'm not comfortable with the potential outcomes of what us sort of tinkering with this, with trying to have control over a thing we have no control over, trying to put some controls in place to mitigate for a thing we have no control over might result in. So, so that's my concern, and that is why I will not be voting in support of advancing this ordinance. Thank you.
Is there any further discussion? That's interesting. So thank you. Is there further discussion from anyone? Commissioner Bozovich.
Thank you. On today, the anniversary of our first confirmed COVID-19 case in Lane County, I am supporting this extension and it was originally requested by Mr. Frohnmeyer, one of the chief petitioners for the star voting, based on the fact of how difficult it would be to try and achieve the correct number of signatures while we were in the COVID emergency. An emergency this board declared has extended multiple times. And I'm hoping that in the whereases for the ordinance that we note some of those, the county's declaration of an emergency, the state's declaration of emergency, the state mandates or shutdowns being the reason for why we want to give the extra 6 months. It's, I think, a reasonable accommodation, just as we went last year and extended the time period a non-conforming use could be out of use without losing their non-conforming use approval. Because we understood under COVID-19 that things like the Oregon Country Fair and Camp Lutherwood couldn't continue to operate in their non-conforming uses. This is a very similar county-controlled activity where we have code that states how long you have to gather signatures. We also had code about how long you could leave a non-conforming use inactive and have it, still keep its permit. It's written in our code. The only correction to that to allow for this county declared, state declared emergency is for the county to take action to change that code. And in this case, specifically for 2 petitions that were in signature gathering when the emergency was declared. I don't feel like it's setting any particular precedents. It's following something we did before as a board. And I think it's fair to both the petitions to give this 6-month extension, which isn't a very long extension when they have 2 years originally to gather the signatures. It's only a 25% extension of time.
Commissioner Buck.
Thank you, Chair. I see both sides of this particular issue. I see the side where I'm actually not sure what the equitable impact is of adding 6 months, as Commissioner Traeger brings up. I don't know that it's passed through our equity committee or that we actually have a process of passing these through our equity committee before they're presented to us. And then again, that may be part of what would come back to the board when, if this is passed. I see the need for sure. People have been huddled in their homes and not able to gather signatures. So there is a great need. I just do want to be respective of the equitable impact that this puts on 2 different measures currently in play and versus ones that may come into play in the 6-month extension timeline.
If I may, Commissioner Buck, are you wanting to amend anything? Are you suggesting a process if approved? Are you suggesting deferring this vote? And forgive me, I'm trying to follow.
Thank you, Chair. I'm concerned that we may not have, or maybe County Council can answer this, if we have a way in which to vet this through an equity lens prior to bringing it to the board.
Mr. Dingle?
Well, no, I guess we could. I mean, I guess what I'm saying is we could certainly draft the ordinance and present it to the Equity and Access Committee before we set it for first reading. We could do that. That's obviously not a legal requirement, but we could do that. But I mean, it seems it's very difficult for them, I think they need to see an ordinance. I don't think they need to see a concept. I think they need to, in fairness to whoever's looking at it, they need to see a draft ordinance to look at it if that's what they're going to do.
Commissioner Traeger.
Thank you. I think just to be 2 parts to be clear. One is, I think if we're talking about using our equity lens as an organization, then we're talking about the committee working on developing the equity lens for the organization, which is not what our Equity and Access Advisory Board is tasked with. When I bring up equity issues in this framework, I'm talking less about impacts on race and ethnicity and equity as it relates to special populations in the community. I'm talking more about the equity between a decision that we make that disequally or inequitably impacts these two different petition processes and the potential outcome because they're not on the same timeline. I don't see it as apples to apples in the example Commissioner Bozovich gave with the conditional use, because those were, you have an annual event, you can't hold it because of this. Hopefully you can next year, we want to help you out. This is quite different because they're on different timelines, and it relates to, you know, I just don't see them as apples to apples. I appreciate the attempt at creating a reference point, but I don't see it as comparable. And I think particularly given the conversation that we've just had recently about candidates and other ballot measures on this spring's ballot and the impacts of COVID on their ability to reach voters, and not making, we're making a tiny special accommodation in terms of the contested races, but not for the ballot measures. I just think this is one of those situations where, again, something that was out of our hands and we're attempting to try to shape it and mitigate for something that's so big. And I'm not sure this gets at it or doesn't just potentially create new and different problems, and that then we're on the hook, or these petitioners are, as Council pointed out earlier, around third-party action that could be taken. So I really appreciate the attempt to help me think about it differently, Commissioner Bozovich, but those didn't satisfy for me. It's a tough call for me.
Commissioner Bozovich, and then if I might say something. No, please go ahead.
Go ahead.
No, I'll follow you. I should have just kept quiet.
So I guess, you know, once again, this is about, it's weird being the longest serving board member with Commissioner Sorensen's ending his service. It doesn't seem like 10 years should be the longest serving board member. But there's been a long and controversial history around the initiative process here in Lane County. And one of the things I've always said is I'm very protective of trying to maintain people's rights to write law from the initiative process. It's something that's ingrained in Oregon. To me, this is, you know, you got a petitioner asking for some accommodations based on a statewide declared emergency. And, you know, there's lots of other things that have been extended, and, you know, like, you know, eviction moratoriums and everything else that were, you know, leases had different terms and everything else. And we're still doing that because it was the right thing to do. To me, this is about not having, you know, the months worth of work leading up to the pandemic and an entire effort to put something on a ballot being thrown out the door and telling them to go back to go because of an artificial deadline we've created in our code of 2 years to collect signatures. You know, that waiving it for the two particular petitions that were in circulation when the emergency was declared, and none have been placed in circulation since. So it'd be very specific to these two. Doesn't seem like an unreasonable accommodation to try and maintain the people's right to the initiative process. That's what motivated me to bring this to the board after I was contacted by Mr. Frohnmeyer, and why I'm supporting it is to try and make sure people still have that right to initiative. And whether I agree or disagree with what they want to have on the ballot, whether I'll vote for it or not, doesn't matter to me. It's about their right to try and place something on the ballot and to do it, you know, without the constraints of COVID hanging over them and without throwing them back to go after they've been in the process for more than a year.
Thank you, Commissioner. Council, this request was made by one of the petitioners, correct?
According to Commissioner Bozovich, I did not have any direct contact with Mr. Frohnmeyer.
Actually, I did, and he requested that. And my understanding is the reason that we're talking about two is those were the only two in play during COVID. And my understanding is that you and Ms. Betchart are trying to accommodate with this. I fail to understand, other than accommodating the request. Well, if I may, Counselor, when does the time run out per initiative? By initiative, I should say. Yeah, I know we've reviewed this, but
Got it. The STAR voting initiative would expire on 2/26/21, and the second amendment sanctuary would expire on 1/2/2022.
thank you
Those are
very
the current. Those are the current expiration dates for them to gather, or deadline for them to gather signatures.
Thank you. And question, the vote here would be on whether or not we construct a draft ordinance to that effect, and Commissioner Buck, that we would have to approve, correct? And then,
This is an ordinance, as Commissioner Bozovich mentioned during executive session. Yeah, this goes through the normal process, first reading, second
right.
public hearing, 13 days must pass, all the normal ordinary rules
And
apply.
during that, just one moment, Commissioner, during that time, can Commissioner, see, I don't even know this, having heard Commissioners Buck and Trieger, can there be an analysis that seems to relate to equity here, be provided to the board before they act on the draft ordinance? Is there a mechanism to do that?
Yeah, yes, Chair Bernie, the board can do that, because ordinarily what would happen, the ordinary process here would be when we're asked to bring back an ordinance is to do a draft of the ordinance for a first reading on a particular date. But certainly there's nothing that prevents the board, if it's the will of the board, to have council draft the ordinance and just draft it, and then schedule a session with the board and have someone come and make a presentation about the analysis of the equity before it's set for a first reading. The formal first reading on an ordinance.
No,
There's
thank
nothing that would prevent the board from doing that.
Thank you very much, and thank you, Commissioner Trieger. I know you wanted to say something.
Oh, absolutely, that's fine, thank you. Thank you for that reminder about what the process is, that there's other opportunity to actually see what the ordinance looks like and give us some more consideration before taking an action. I just, for the record, wanted to make very clear, because I may have been misunderstanding an implication in a comment. For me, this has zero to do with the topic that these two petitions represent and the issue that they're trying to get on the ballot. It is purely an equitable process question for me.
Okay. Is there any more discussion prior to the calling of the question? I need assistance with the motion. And I apologize for that.
Thank you. As the maker of the motion, Mr. Dingle, will you read the motion as you stated it? Because that is verbatim the motion that I would like to make.
I will try. County Council, with the assistance of Ms. Betchart, will prepare an ordinance that, pursuant to Oregon law, which grants the board the authority to extend the period to gather signatures for local measures, to extend the deadline for each one of these measures 6 months from the deadline that currently exists, that the measure will make it, or that the ordinance will make it clear it applies to these two specific measures and these measures only, and 3, that it will contain a sunset clause that automatically expires at the conclusion of the time that they would be scheduled for the election.
Thank you, Mr. Dingle. And Mr. Chair, that is the motion. And I have witnessed Ms. Jones actually verbatim writing down motions, going over and over again, the recorded dialogue to get the exact wording of the motion. So I know that will happen in this case also. So that is the motion, Chair Bernie.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. That has been moved and seconded. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed? And the motion which Mr. Dingle articulated, which I cannot, which Ms. Jones will put verbatim, has been moved by Commissioner Farr and seconded by Commissioner Bozovich, and has been unanimously approved. And I hope, Counselor, you noted the discussion, the kind of analysis that we would like to see with the draft, and we appreciate that very much.
Thank you, Chair Bruni. I've got that. And I would, if the board would give some idea about when you'd like to have this come back. Obviously, to me, it seems like it should be sooner rather than later because we're chipping into the time there. So,
Please, anyone want to comment? My not representing the board, representing myself, comment is the sooner the better.
Okay.
Only because we want to give the petitioners time to organize whatever actions they need to organize.
Mr. Dingle,
yes, Diana?
can I was wondering if you would like to add to your motion that you would also like to declare an emergency, otherwise the ordinance will take 30 days to enact?
Right. Excellent addition. Well, that's true. It'll be an emergency.
Close. Thank you, Ms. Jones.
At this point in time, Diana, do we have anyone that would like to make public comment?
We do not.
At this point in time, would commissioners like, it's been a long day, but would you like to discuss, as Commissioner Trieger is, or Commissioner Trieger, is now the time to discuss what at least this evening feels like a lack of public participation, or shall we have that discussion later?
No, I'm happy to bring it forward at our next regular board meeting. Thank you.
Are there any? Yes, Commissioner Farr.
Chair Bernie, this will allow me to go to either the Community Health Council or the Public Poverty and Homelessness Board strategy meeting, and it will allow Commissioner Trieger to go to the Community Health Council meeting. So excellent.
Oh, well, in that case, get comfortable. We're going to be here for a while. Okay, but if there's no other business, this meeting is adjourned. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.